Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Bob Oaks. Bob Oaks represents the 130th Assembly District, an Assembly District that includes Wayne, Cayuga, and Oswego counties. We want to thank you folks all throughout the region for joining us. Bob Oaks, how do you do?
Hi, Mike. How are you today?
Nice to see you. Busy time, as we've been saying, with the budget talks in full swing at the state capitol. We're going to hit a few other topics, though, today. One of them kind of budget related, and that's changing, maybe fixing the Medicaid problem that New York State has. And maybe some people out here don't know that New York State has a Medicaid problem. We'll explain all that and how it does have an impact on you folks, the way New York State deals with Medicaid and all the ramifications thereof. Might not sound exciting, but it's important. In the meantime, we start off with a piece of good news. You've got a fella in your district who's been named School Superintendent of the Year. That's not something to be treated lightly.
Well, it isn't. Actually,
I don't know if he gets a superhero costume and a cape or anything. But
you know, actually, one of the reasons he's Superintendent of the Year, we saw a video with Bob Oaks, who's the Palmyra-Macedon or Pelmac Superintendent for the last decade, and Bob uses things like that to make presentations to the faculty, to students. He's participated in local plays and other things just to show his position in the community and his willingness to do anything to try to get your attention, to focus on educating our kids and how we do that best. And, you know, we can argue about, should we fund schools differently? Should we fund them better? Should we target something here and whatever? But if you don't have professionals and leaders in the field who are dedicated to kids and trying to educate our kids better, that's not going to happen no matter how much money we spend or how we spend it. So people like Bob Oaks, and there's many other excellent superintendents, but having him singled out across New York State, I'm not sure how many school districts there are, but 600 or 700 of them across the state. To have him singled out was very special. Got a chance actually at the Capitol Center, the new Albany Conference or Convention Center that's been built last Monday. Being able to attend that, to be a part of the presentation, and also have Pelmac's award-winning select choir come down and sing at that event for all the people in attendance, and then to travel over to the $1 Million Staircase at the state capitol. And of course, a word to those who are watching this, if you ever get a chance to come to Albany, you need to just put the Capitol on your tour. You may not hear a group like the Pelmac Select Choir singing at it, but they went to the Capitol, sang there as well, and the Lieutenant Governor and others heard the noise and went down to check out. They really did a great job, both, again, at the presentation, but want to honor Bob Oaks, but also the kids and excellence that comes out of a lot of our public schools.
And he sounds like the kind of guy that probably his best part of the whole day was getting the chance to put the spotlight on the kids and their performance here at the state capitol in front of so many people here in Albany. You know, people, if you come to Albany and check out the capitol during the month of March, March is Music in Our Schools month, and there is constantly groups out here in the Capitol complex performing. And so it is, every time I leave here from doing some of these TV shows, I get to walk right by choruses and bands and jazz ensembles and one thing after another. It's pretty impressive.
It really is, and I got a chance to take the choir and some of the group that came with them to do a tour of the Capitol. And one of the other thing is the Hall of Governors and the timeline across New York State's history and New York's place in America's history and really, you know, the last couple hundred years of the world. It's very interesting if you're a historian, and also if you like music, you like history, you really need to come to Albany and see your state capitol.
So New York State has a Medicaid problem, as I pointed out at the top of this program. You stood together with some of your colleagues yesterday and said, we really need to do something about it. And the reason being, the premise that was put out there is that if New York State could figure out a way to change its funding or financing of Medicaid, which is a $72 billion portion of our state budget? I think I've got those numbers right.
Our state budget is over $160 billion, in fact, pushing $170 billion, and that 60 to 70 billion, as you said, is in Medicaid. And so that is health care going to a lot of people who don't have resources of their own, people who are working poor or people who are unable to work. It also pays for a lot of people with disabilities and programs and services for them. It also, if someone is in a nursing home at the end of their life and runs out of their own money, we don't, as I tell kids, we don't kick grandma out in the snowbank. We as a society come together to pay to continue to care for her. If someone has a head injury in an auto accident and they have to go into rehab and it might take a few years to do that, a lot of people don't have the resources to pay for that themselves, or regular insurance runs out. All of that comes together to pay for Medicaid program.
And you're not advocating now changing that up and throwing grandma out into the snowbank. Well, your point was that if you refigured the financing, you would actually be able to lower property taxes in the state and maybe do what we see happening at the federal level right now, tax reductions, increase in economic growth.
Well, and very honestly, Medicaid is a federal program that is then shared with the states.
Okay.
Local government has no control over it, the counties. But county governments in New York are asked to pay a portion of the bill. And property taxpayers, if you think about it, how should we fund Medicaid? We're using federal tax dollars, we're usually using state tax dollars, but should we be using property taxpayer dollars in our local communities? And the argument is, we're making, it's time for the state and federal government to be the full funder of this, not our local property taxpayers. And so county governments, whether it's Wayne County or Oswego or Cayuga or Onondaga or Monroe, they're all spending lots of dollars on Medicaid program, and that's increasing the tax dollars. What we're suggesting is do a phased-in takeover of that program so that no more will we be using property taxpayer dollars at the local level.
One of the reasons, one of the things that we've heard from the state's association of counties or different county executives over all the years has been not only that about the impact on the property tax, but that the local counties have never had any say as to which parts of the Medicaid program New York State should be taking part in, because there are options to that. You don't have to just take them all. You can pick this one. It's like a Chinese menu, column A, column B. But New York State seems to just take them all, bring them all on, which just increases what the county's portion of the payments needs to be it's almost like without representation.
Absolutely. And so our plan would say, okay, let's do this. Let's start this phased-in takeover, and let's do this over a 10-year period. We feel there are dollars available now, and we will make them available over the next 10 years to do this. At the same time as the state's taking on more of this, they can then start looking at more seriously, how do we run a more efficient program? We don't want to end services to those who need it, but we also don't want to just go on spending at high levels because New York has the most expensive Medicaid program per capita across the country. And so we think these two focus, try to deal with fraud and waste and abuse, also become more efficient of how we deliver the services. We think we can do this and still meet the needs of New Yorkers.
All right, and all this coming up as the legislative leaders are figuring out budgeting for the state of New York for this 2018-2019 fiscal year. How's that process going? Since the last time we met, you and others have agreed upon what the state's going to have to spend in terms of a revenue figure Now it's just, okay, so we've got X amount to spend. How are we going to spend it?
And as we're taping this show today, we're awaiting one House budget bills so that we can begin to look at that. The governor put out his plan in January. We had budget hearings to talk about that. And now we're dealing with the one House budget bill the Assembly will put out. We'll debate that bill, make suggestions, but hopefully by the end of this week, we will have conference committees beginning to meet to talk about the Senate's proposal, the Assembly's proposal, and the governor's proposal to come up with a final plan, hopefully before the end of this month.
It's almost like the positions now are being staked out in serious. The governor, of course, had done his earlier. Now we'll have an Assembly proposal, a Senate proposal, and let the real horse trading begin. Do we think that horse trading can be put together in time by the beginning of the fiscal year on April 1st, which happens to be Easter Sunday this year?
I was just going to say the regular calendar and the religious calendars actually may have an impact. My thing is we aren't going to have an on-time budget this year. We're either going to have an early budget or a late budget. Passover begins on Friday before Easter, and so negotiations happening that weekend probably don't happen. So we either have a budget by Friday before Easter, the 29th or 30th, or we have a budget sometime after April 1st.
Sometime after. And that certainly has happened. New York State's had a long record of late state budgets, but they've been more on target the past few years. The problem this year is the governor, in his budget presentation, talked about $4 billion plus deficit that was going to need to be made up. That sounds like everybody's really going to have to roll up their shirt sleeves to try to figure that out.
It's interesting. The governor this year seemed to go over the top a bit. He wasn't happy with the federal tax proposal. And so he's kind of been claiming New York State's problem, in my estimation, is bigger than it really is. That $4 billion deficit, or 4.4, I think he was suggesting, we feel is really more like 1.5 or 1.7. We also had revenues come in at the end of the last calendar year greater than what the governor anticipated. We think we'll end this fiscal year in pretty decent shape. I don't want us just spending money for the sake of spending money. But the governor is suggesting that we have over $1 billion of new taxes and fees. I don't think we need to add that at this time to the budget so we can spend more. I think it's going to be a lot easier on the financial side to come together, and it isn't as big of a challenge as what the governor was suggesting back when he first put his budget out.
And you talk about the confluence of the religious calendar and the legislative calendar. There's also, on the end of the calendar this year, another holiday called Election Day. And the governor is gearing up for that. So, I mean, this is all going to come into play because he's going to want an on-time budget. And I would hope he's going to want a responsible budget, too. I guess time will tell.
Well, what we don't want, and the governor puts an awful lot of policy into his budget. Hopefully the governor won't stand and say, I want all that policy this year, because some of it's bad policy in my estimation. I hope we stick to the numbers more this year and get a budget on time.
Bob Oaks, we want to let the folks know how they can reach you. Any of the topics you've heard discussed here today, if you want to let Bob Oaks know how you feel about those, easy thing for you to do to reach out to him. Contact him at his office in Lyons. You can dial 315-946-5166, or you can drop an email at oaksr@nyassembly.gov, or check him out on Facebook. And we thank Bob Oaks for joining us. We thank you folks too, and hope to see you soon for our next Assembly Calendar.